Yes. So we are at relationship between international law and municipal law because in certain circumstances the situation may arise in the municipal court that international convention will be cited as a law, and contrary to that international convention, municipal legislation can be cited. Then the question before court will be to give primacy to which law, either to international law or to municipal law, or whether to harmonize both the legislations or interpret both the legislations harmoniously. So that's what we are discussing, how this relationship has been dealt with. So for giving answer to solve the conflict between two legal systems, the five theories were developed by the different jurists, and those theories are giving answer to the relationship between international law and municipal law. So first theory we see in theory of monism, wherein the legal system is one for both, be it international law or municipal law. It is the one legal system. So international law will prevail or international law become applicable once a state is a party to particular convention. Second theory is theory of dualism. It says contrary to monist that legal systems, international law and municipal law are two different legal systems. One is regulating state, another is regulating individual. Therefore, international law cannot be directly enforced into municipal sphere. Third theory dealing with the specific adoption theory. As per this theory, unless there is specific adoption of international law into municipal law, as per the constitutional procedure of respective nation, international law cannot be held applicable into domestic sphere, into particular nation. Then third theory is dealing about the transformation. It simply speaks about the transformation of international law into municipal. And lastly, delegation theory. It talks about delegation of power by international convention to the nations. So nations can implement international law into municipal. But practically such delegation is not possible due to territorial sovereignty principle. Then we move towards the state practices. The first state practice we observed, the practice of Britain, that what Britain does in case of these relations, in case of these legal systems. So we seen they maintain a difference between whether it is customary law or treaty law. They treat customary law as a part of law of Britain with subject to certain conditions, and try to interpret customary international law with British law harmoniously. Then if there were treaties and it was adopted by the parliament, then treaties will prevail. We also referred one case law wherein it was stated that is if the international law is recognized by the highest court of the Britain, then that international law is considered as a part of British law. Now today we will move towards the American practice, what America observes in case of conflict between international law and municipal law. So in America also, the practice regarding customary rules of international law and the rules laid down by treaty is different. So first we will observe the customary rules of international law, then we will go to the treaty rules. So in America, also, customary rule of international law are treated as a part of American law. Similarly, like Britain, America also treat the customary law as a part of American law. So beside this, the American court also interpret the statute law of the Congress in such a way that it may not go against international law. So here statutory law means codified legislations of America. American court interpret such codified law or such statutory law. Congress means parliament in America, that is called as Congress. They interpret the law made by Congress in such a way that it will not go against international law. So this is the principle of interpretation, that whenever there is conflict between two legislation, try to interpret both the legislation in such a way that both will go harmoniously. And if it is not possible, then ultimately the American law will prevail. So same thing is observed by the America in case of customary rules of international law. First, they treat them as their own law. Secondly, if it is contrary to the statute law of Congress, then they will harmoniously interpret as far as possible. If not possible, then American law will prevail. So the second, that is rules of treaties. So here in America, everything depends upon the provision of constitution, not only in America, but in every country. The practice depends upon the what constitution of respective country says. So here also, America rely upon their own constitutional provision to give treatment to the international. So Article 4 of the American Constitution provides that the Constitution of the United States, all laws made in pursuance of the international treaties entered into under the authority of the United States shall be supreme law of the land. So, if the international law was adopted by America, then it is but natural they were supreme law. So, America also follows specific adoption theory. Therefore, simply international treaties have been placed in the same category as a state law in America. So equal weightage has been given, provided the laws shall be made in pursuance thereof, and the international treaties entered under the authority of United States shall be supreme law. So there must be a domestic legislation in simple word in America adopting particular international treaty. Then both international law and American law will be at par with each other as per the Article 6 of the Constitution of America. So it may, however, be noted that in America, the practice is that if there is conflict, now here is the question of dispute. If there is no conflict, no question, both law will go. But if there is conflict, conflict means inconsistency. So, if there is a conflict between the international treaty and state law, whichever latter in date shall prevail. Simply, the American Constitution makes the provision that whatever latter in date will prevail means subsequent law overrules earlier law. With this provision or with this principle, American Constitution goes that they will see which was made latter. So date of implementation of the law. If the international treaty is made subsequently inconsistent with the American law, international law or treaty will prevail over American law. So they see the date. So simply whichever latter in date shall prevail. जे नंतरच्या तारखेचा असेल त्याला प्राधान्य असेल म्हणजे what is of a recent origin that will be prevailed. So if they simply follow the whatever latter in date shall prevail, it means the subsequent law automatically overrules or repeal earlier law if it is on same subject matter, of course. So if there is a conflict between American Constitution and international treaty, of course the former, the Constitution will prevail. But this latter in date rule is not applicable to Constitution of America. It is applicable to ordinary law. See the difference between Constitution and ordinary law. Ordinary law means the law enacted by American Congress, and Constitution means the Constitution of USA itself. Like in India, the other legislations, NDPS Act, whatever, Indian Penal Code, contract, transfer of property, they were ordinary law, and Constitution of India is a constitutional law. So the latter in date rule is not prevail in case of Constitution. There, the Constitution will prevail. In other words, if there is a conflict between constitutional provision of America and international treaty, it is the Constitution of America that will prevail irrespective of the date. So again, take a note of this that The latter in date rule is applicable to law enacted by American Congress, not to the Constitution of America. So, beside this, in America, the treaties have been divided into two categories: self-executing and non-self-executing treaties. Self-executing means treaties are valid on their own. There is no need to make further process over it, like to put it into parliament, take the majority, take the decision, take the vote, and then accept it. So that is non or self-executing, non-self-executing. So first we will see the self-executing treaties are those treaties which become applicable in America without any act or consent of the Congress. The consent is to be given in the United Nations itself. That is sufficient. There is no need further to come into America, put the treaty in American Congress, get the vote, passed it through the resolution, then made it applicable. That will happen, of course, in case of non-self-executing treaties. So, on the other hand, the non-self-executing treaties are those which can become applicable in America only after the consent of the Congress at through its adoption by a specific statute. Means for non-self-executing treaties, America follows the specific adoption theory. But for self-executing, it is monism. That is, the self-executing treaties and American law is one and the same. They will go equally. So now third, we will move towards the Indian practice. So what India does in respect of international law, or what kind of treatment India gives to the international. So while observing the Indian practice about the relationship between two legal systems, of course we have to see first the what practice was followed during British India, because international law is developed even India was not independent. India is a colony of Britishers. Since then, even the United Nations Charter was adopted on 1945. India got independence 2 years thereafter, and thereafter 3 years the constitution came in the year 1950. But prior to 1950, how far the practice of international law is going on in India, that we have to see. So, of course, it is but natural that before the adoption of Indian Constitution, the Indian practice was similar to the British practice, because it is under the British rule. So, whatever British practice is in Britain, the same practice was adopted by the Britain for their colonies, not only for India, but all those colonies who were within the regime of Britain. So, so till commencement of constitution, we can say it goes like British practice. So no need to rediscuss again the British practice about customary and treaty laws. Now we will see post constitution era period. So after adoption of the constitution, practice depends upon the provision of the constitution, because once constitution come, constitution made the provision that what kind of treatment is to be given to the international law by Indian government, by Indian court, etc. So, in order to know the position of international law in the post constitutional period, it is necessary to examine the relevant provision of the Indian constitution. Yes. So, the most relevant provision in the constitution, we will not go directly to the preamble, but we will observe only direct references to the international law. So first reference you will found in Article 51 of the Indian Constitution. 51 is a part of Article 51 is the article composing in which part of the Constitution, or in which chapter, or under which head of the Constitution. 51. Yes, comment in chat box. Article 51 of the Constitution is dash dash or is a part that deals with, yes, Ashish Shinde, directive principles of state policy. It is a part fourth of the Indian Constitution. You see Constitution of India divided into 24 parts, initially 22, later amendment 24. The silent feature of the Indian Constitution. It is comprehensive constitution consisting of 395 articles divided into 24 parts, etc. So out of those 24 parts, part third deals with fundamental right, most important, and part fourth provides for the directive principles of state policy. Yes, so the promotion of international peace, security, that was laid down there. So that's what it is, directive principles. Now you will realize what is the difference between fundamental right and directive principles. And though directive principles are not enforceable, they are basic for the governance of the country, because how government has to implement governance, that has to be given in the directive principles of state policy. What kind of welfare measures is to be adopted in food, health, employment, in these sectors, including international affairs. So, without wasting much time, we will go to Article 51. It is the part of directive principle. So it is not enforceable as per 37. Why not enforceable? You see in the constitution that because of the resources available with the state. Once state will get equipped itself with the resources to implement this provision, state will implement. One cannot force to the state to implement right to food, right to education, right to health immediately. That's what even today we don't have a universal health care act, unlike other legislation, right to health act, etc. Though we have right to education, so after long time, that too, because of the inadequacy of the resources. So leave it apart and come to Article 51. So it says the state shall endeavor, that's what the wording used in the constitution is endeavor. प्रयत्न करायचे. State shall endeavor to first promote international peace and security. आंतरराष्ट्रीय शांता सुरक्षितता प्रस्थापित करणे, शांतता सुरक्षितता. Second, maintain just and honorable relations between nations. राष्ट्रामध्ये योग्य आणि काय मराठीत म्हणतोय ऑनरेबल आदराचे संबंध प्रस्थापित करणे. तीन, foster respect for international law and treaty obligations. Here the clause C is more important because here express reference is there relating to international law and treaty law. Yes. So foster respect for international law and treaty obligations in the dealings of organized people with one another. So it not only concerned with the nations, but even it also talked about organized people. Organized, but they are not state. That's what non-state entities were covered by the Indian Constitution. So, and last, encourage settlement of international disputes by arbitration. So we can say that 51 of the Constitution gives a guiding line for giving treatment to international. So it is significant here to note that Article 51C तिकडे 15C झाला असेल ई कंटेंट मध्ये नोट्स मध्ये, that is 51 clause C specifically mentions international law and treaty obligation. However, this article is a part of part fourth, that is directive principles of state policy, and as per Article 37, as already noted, the provisions contained in this part are not enforceable in any court. So one cannot go into the writ petition seeking directions from the Supreme Court to implement particular international conventions. We will go to that in the when we will see cases. So But it also states that nevertheless, the provisions are fundamental in the governance of the country, and it shall be the duty of state to apply these principles in making laws. But it is on the will of state. Therefore, it cannot be contended that they are of no significance or even less significance than the fundamental right. They are complementary and supplementary to each other. Yes. So, directive principles are not inferior to fundamental right. That's what they cannot be brushed aside. They are supplementary and complementary to each other. This has been hailed or this has been declared, not only held by court, but has been declared by 24th and 25th Amendments of the Constitution, which were challenged but upheld in Minerva Mills. So, Article 51 does not give, we can say, clear guidance regarding the position of international law in India, as well as the relationship of municipal law and international law. That's what we have to move further and see some other articles dealing with the relationship between two. So, whether the constitution has altered the position prevailing in pre-constitution period, because in pre-constitution era, the British practice is observed. What Indian constitution did about that practice, or whatever Britishers established into the legal system through common law legal system, whether that has been modified by the Indian constitution, or if modified, what is the extent of such modification. For this sake, we have to see Article 372 Clause 1 of the Indian Constitution, because that gives the correct picture about the continuance of pre-constitutional position even after the commencement of the Constitution. So see Article 372 Clause 1. It says that notwithstanding the repeal by this Constitution of the enactment referred to in Article 395, but subject to other provision of this Constitution, all laws in force in the territory of India immediately before the commencement of the Constitution shall continue in force here and after until altered or repealed or amended by the competent legislature or other competent authority. In short, Article 372 Clause 1 continued all pre-constitutional laws unless they were expressly repealed by 395. 395 gives a list of legislations which have been repealed. If the law doesn't found place in 395, it is continued. But while continuing, an obstacle has been made. That is, it should not be inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution, or it should not be altered, repealed, amended by legislature thereafter. So, in case of international law, we can say the British practice has been continued by the Indian Constitution by virtue of 372 Clause 1. So, all pre-constitutional law which we are studying, Indian Evidence Act, Indian Penal Code, Transfer of Property Act, are continued by virtue of 372 Clause 1 because they are pre-constitutional laws enacted by the Britishers. Therefore, the position prevailing immediately preceding means before, the commencement of the Constitution continues even after the coming into force of the Constitution. So in India, also, customary rules of international law are part of the municipal law, like Britain, provided they are not inconsistent with any legislative enactment or the provision of the Constitution of India. Ultimately, every state had given primacy to their own law. And if their own law is not inconsistent, then international law will go. So barricades of the municipal legislation is created almost by every country to give away to international law to proceed or to move further into municipal sphere. So as regards the treaty rules also, India follows or less the British dualist view. Same practice is followed by India because of common law legal system. That is to say, international law can become part of municipal law of India if it has been specifically incorporated. So India specifically follow specific adoption theory, and this was held by the Supreme Court in state of Madras versus V.G. Memon, 1954 Supreme Court. The Supreme Court held that the Indian Extradition Act of 1903 earlier British has been adopted, but the Fugitive Offenders Act 1881 of the British Parliament has been left severely alone. That was not adopted by the India. Therefore, the provisions of Fugitive Offenders Act 1881 have no force in India. So, because that was repealed. So, what we can say, as per 51, it gives the guidance for state to deal with international law. 372 continued the British practice, and for treaty rules, the specific adoption theory is followed. Now, for this specific adoption theory, express article has been made by the Indian Constitution in the form of Article 253 of the Indian Constitution. You might have been come across with this article when you studied the distribution of legislative powers under Indian Constitution. What 253 talks about? Article 253 of the Constitution. Lawmaking power of the Parliament. Yes, we will now come to 253. See what 253 says. Parliament has power to make any law for the whole or any part of the territory of India. So, territorial legislative jurisdictions of the Parliament for implementing any treaty, agreement, convention with any other country or countries or any decision made at an international conference, associations, or other body. So, Article 253 confers power upon Parliament to implement international law by making a suitable legislation. That's what Indian Extradition Act, United Nations Act, the Diplomatic Agent Act, several legislations are there in field of municipal law implementing the International Convention, Environment Protection Act, Human Right Protection Act. Yes, that we will see in the cases also. So, in Shiv Kumar Sharma versus Union of India 1969 Delhi High Court and Magan Bhai Patel versus Union of India 1969 Supreme Court, it was held that treaties settling the boundary dispute does not require legislation. Now, these two judgment said that no express legislation is necessary if there were settlement of boundary dispute between the two nations, but still Parliament enact the laws for this sake, even though there is a settlement of dispute. Then we will go to the next judgment, wherein the international law and municipal law were discussed. You might have been heard this judgment in emergency, particularly state national emergency. The case is called as, yes, ADM Jabalpur versus Shivkant Shukla, 1976 Supreme Court. This case is also called as popularly Kaya. This case is relating to in relation with chat box. This case is popularly called as habeas corpus case. What is habeas corpus? ADM Jabalpur, Additional District Magistrate Jabalpur versus Shivkant Shukla. AIR 1976 Supreme Court. This case is popularly called as habeas corpus case because thousands of habeas corpus petitions were collected and heard at the one single point of time by the court. During the emergency, several leaders of oppositions were detained by the ruling Congress party then, and they were filed writ of habeas corpus in this case. And they contended that even during emergency, their fundamental rights cannot be suspended. But we have Article 359 in the Indian Constitution. It says that if there is a proclamation of emergency, right now this article was amended. It was earlier, prior to this judgment, I am saying 359. Once emergency is proclaimed in a state, the fundamental rights are suspended, particularly Article 29, 22, etc. So their habeas corpus petition was rejected. Habeas corpus petition is a petition filed by a person who is illegally detained to seek order from the court to release him. So those who are detained by the ruling party, they approach to the court seeking habeas corpus writ prayer to release them. But the court stated that as per Article 359 of the Indian Constitution, even emergency is proclaimed, the fundamental rights are suspended and you cannot claim certain fundamental right during emergency. Contrary to this, the international convention was cited from the petitioner, that is International Covenant on Civil and Political Right 1966 and International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights 1966, giving certain right, that is right to access to justice, right to life, personal liberty, etc. So what is to be done with that? Petitioner said, yes, 359 says, but what about these international conventions to which India is signatory? So conflict arose between international law and Indian constitution. But the court ruled in favor of state, in favor of constitution, that during emergency, fundamental rights are suspended. So, and their petition was rejected. However, one judge, Justice H.R. Khanna, he had given the what we call dissenting judgment against all other majority judges. And he said that even though there is a proclamation of emergency, certain fundamental rights cannot be suspended, right to access to justice. न्याय मागण्याचा अधिकार हा सस्पेंड होणार नाही कारण that is inherent, that is not conferred by any constitution. It is inherent right of human being who acts in any legal system to approach to the court, and the provision is wrong. At least right to access to justice should be there. However, this judgment being a dissenting judgment, that was not followed. The majority judgment was followed. But subsequently, when the Congress government was loosed in the election after the war of emergency, the new Janata Dal government came, the amended constitution and 44th amendment was made. Yes, and they amended Article 359 as well as several provisions relating to proclamation of emergency and stated that now fundamental right during emergency cannot be suspended. Or even in ADM Jabalpur, Justice Khanna stated that if two interpretation of municipal law are possible, the court should adopt such interpretation which will bring harmony into municipal law and international law. So by giving access to justice, it will lead to harmonious construction between International Convention and Article 359. Yes, 44th Amendment later enacted. So in this view, the constitutional provision should be interpreted in such a way as to avoid conflict with international conventions. However, that was not done in ADM Jabalpur, but subsequently it was done. So what we can say that thereafter the judicial activism was started in India. So after this was the last judgment wherein court exercised judicial restraint. But thereafter the Maneka and post Maneka scenario, you will be observed that the judicial activism was held such and actively that several schemes were implemented by the Supreme Court, like a parliament. So we will see all other cases dealing with the relation between these two legal systems tomorrow. Okay, thank you very much.